Thanks. I have a clear note that Shane said I could speak for 2 hours. No, he's laughing at the front. Good. I'll do my best, but Samira, just stop me, okay? Because I look at the end, and 3 hours later I'll stop. I'm actually very pleased to be here, and thanks Shane for the invitation very much. I'm actually interested in the little word "our," because I'm probably going to slightly break with what Shane asked me to do, but you'll see why. I'm interested in the people. You're the industry. I'm not going to be able to tell you anything about what you know. I'm interested in the people, the eater, the consuming mass, if you like. And in particular, I'm here because I'm actually working on a report for the National Preparedness Commission, a body you've never heard of, which when I first came across it, I thought it was definitely an MI6 front or possibly Soviet Union, but that's gone. But actually it is full of the great, the good, and there are a couple of ex-MI6 heads on it. But it's basically a whole group of people who came together and said the state of Britain is not resilient. It's not prepared for shocks. It's not prepared for really the big changes that most of us, you in this room, let alone boring fart academics like me, we know the food system is in a really bad place. It's not working, and yet it is working. You make it work, but it's not working. So we've got a real muddled set of criteria. So I want to just give you, I think I did some slides really just in case you fall asleep. But I'm going to give I've got a written speech. I these days don't like slides, but so I'll send Shane and the organisers a speech. So if you want my full thoughts, they're there with references for you. But basically I want to open by saying, what do we mean by resilience? We borrow this term from physics. It means when an object hits another object and one is more powerful than the other, and it sort of breaks or has an impact, what happens then? Can it bounce back? Can it return to a different state? Not necessarily the same state, but can it return to that? We keep using this word. It's a bit like sustainability. It's actually almost losing its meaning. People like you use resilience in a way, maybe business resilience. That is not what resilience is about. Resilience is about ecosystems, commerce, economics definitely, but also society. Unless you include the people in the notion of resilience, we will not get the right picture of what we want from a more resilient food system. Some people use resilience to mean sort of tweaking the system a little bit to keep it going all right. Maybe still having trucks belting up and down motorways forever and just tweak the energy sources into it, and others are saying, no, that's actually out of date. That's 19th century logistics. 21st century is going to be more localized, much more bioregional, something totally different may be what emerges. And I come from that sort of, if you like, radical but reasonable position. But the critical issue, and why I said I would do this report, which I hope will come out early next year, depends if they like what I give them, is because I think unless we have mass resilience, the social resilience, the sort of connections implied by this, that sustainability and resilience actually go hand in hand. And the sort of shock stuff is this bit on the left. What happens if all the satellites in your chain are taken out? It's not a little tweak that's going to resolve things. What is going to happen if half of Tesco's distribution centres are taken out? Tesco sells a third of British food. What if the Channel Tunnel, with a private police force, malfunctions? This is different league. Now, when people like me were talking about this 10 years ago, 5 years ago, I thought, scaremongering nonsense. Ukraine has changed everything. So I think there's a critical issue, which is a good country one which just says it doesn't matter if 40% of all households with 2 children are now cutting back on food because they can't afford it? You might think, what's that got to do with logistics? It's resilience, stupid. It's the society that's at stake. And you don't control society. You too are functions within it. What we've got to accept is that we know, and I'm sure some of you know this, the latest national risk literature has just come out. It's got 89 risks in it. It's increased dramatically. Food is only put down as one. I cannot believe the stupidity of that. That food is an immediate shock to societies and to people if it stops. 5 days of disruption. We've been talking for my report, looking at other countries. I can tell you and will tell you about countries which have been preparing for 7 years since the Russians invaded Crimea, of knowing that invasions and difficulties will happen. And Britain is doing absolutely nothing to engage with its people. Now, it's not your business, this, but it will affect your business if your business is taken out. But we know the scale of the risk coming for the food system is immense. The only risk in the NRR is antimicrobial resistance. That's the one that has 3 pages in the 200-page report. But the biggest risk is anticipated, by the way, as another pandemic within 5 years. But what if for the 4 big retailers that account for, what is it, Terry, 70% of all food sales in Britain, what if a couple of them taken out? What if something really malfunctions in a big way? I know your industries, I know the insurance industry, the cybersecurity industry. We talk about that, and we know perfectly well those are there. The National Cybersecurity Agency, I think, is doing a good job, actually. It's a good arm of the British state. But when it comes to DEFRA, is there anyone from DEFRA here? When it comes to DEFRA, I say this publicly, let alone in Chatham House, under Chatham House rule, DEFRA, I think, is away with the fairies at the moment. If you look at the Critical National Infrastructure annual report, it just says everything's fine. There's not a problem. I mean, this is not a good approach to risk management. This is nearer to what Shane asked me to talk about. He's smiling. Let's just say I take a long view. The food system basically is 12,000 years old when settled agriculture began, roughly about that, although there are arguments from anthropologists about it. But the 21st century food system is very different already to what it was in the middle of the 19th century. But essentially, the driving policy framework for the whole of the 20th century, late 20th century, and still residual now, is around a very simple, what people like me call productionist paradigm, namely that science and technology will resolve all difficulties, that they will produce more food, and that the real problem back in the 19th century, resolved by the 20th century, was producing more food. But it's been done almost entirely by nitrogen. Fertilizers is what has actually increased production. What was the biggest impact of the Ukraine invasion? A little realization that the whole of the Western world's model of agriculture depended upon oil futures, oil turned into fertilizers, let alone driving the trucks. So the length of the supply chains, which you people are brilliant at, may be actually one of the things we've got to radically change. What would a more bioregional food system look like in 40 years' time or 30 years' time? I would like you, Shane, and your colleagues, to start thinking about that, because DEFRA isn't. But that's what will be needed if there are big shocks. I now speak after many interviewing many top people in preparation for my report. But the political economy has changed. And it's not just about technology, it's cultural industries, the consciousness industries, the informers, the influencers, and so on. That is the mass food delivery systems near homes. The normalization has changed almost everything. I think I asked it to change. There we go. But what the dynamics, I won't talk about it. If you're interested, my last book, Feeding Britain, spells in interminably boring detail all the issues and the dynamics and the fault lines. I tried to write it as well as I could, but it's not exactly bedtime reading, unless you're weird. Just seeing if you're still listening. But one of the things that's happened is mass availability has changed. You know, nine companies sell 94.5% of all British retail food. Food is cheaper. Just in time has become the god. It's efficient, but also highly vulnerable. There's no storage. The storage is on the motorway or on the plane or in the ship or in the air. Software and satellite dependency is frankly astonishing. You cannot, on one level, you can extol it and say, isn't it wonderful, flip it, and it becomes a major risk factor. It's the infrastructure. But let's go political for a moment. The high concentration levels among companies is itself, I think, an economic risk. But intensive production, Terry, who'll follow me, whom I've known for at least 25 years, here's something that he and I argued about years ago, but now see the nature of production on the land has created new risks. But if we turn over to where my centre, the centre I set up, but now don't run anymore, I stood down from it, we work a lot in public health. I mean, it's food which creates the biggest burden of ill health. It's the biggest driver of NHS costs. If there's a pandemic, you may say, what's that got to do with logistics? If there's a pandemic, the whole system screws up. And one of the biggest threats, even 15 years ago, to the food system, in a very interesting study done by the military people at Cranfield for DEFRA then, in the days when DEFRA was thinking about these things, said the problem would be if workforces go down in a pandemic. That's not a technology issue. So stop getting fixated upon technology is my point. New vulnerabilities are about people, not just the infrastructure. The big, should I point it here? Why is it not going? There we go. There are policy frameworks. Don't think there's nothing happening. There is. I've put here, I mean, in DEFRA, this is Terry's and my world. DEFRA started, I got excited when the white paper was health and harmony, but it's nothing about health and it's not about harmony either. But it ended up in the Agriculture Act, nothing about you, it should have been about you. Then there was a little false avenue with Henry Dimbleby's National Food Strategy, which was interesting work if you don't know it, but then completely ignored and rubbished by the Prime Minister 4 hours after it came out. But the document you want to read is that one on the right. Any of you read it? Shame. Well, okay, I'm going to say shame on you, not shame. You need to read that, because that is the loose, vacuous document which is our defence at the moment. Please read it. You can read it in bed, I assure you. It's so lightweight, it is really, really worth a read. Basically, it doesn't recognise anything that matters in the food system. It doesn't set any targets or any notion, should we be growing more? What sort of food? How should we do it? What sort of diet do we want to feed? How can we deal with the people? How can we protect them? How can we have a workforce which is healthy? You were talking in a session I was in earlier about how do you get young people to come? How can you keep them alive? Might be a more interesting thing. Because Britain is basically creating a massive diet-related ill health gap. The inequalities between the richest 10% and the bottom 10%. Anyone tell me how many years that is? It's 12 years now. Did you know that? It's staggering what we put up with as normal. Basically, there are frameworks there, but too much is this my sixth point. Basically, we're dealing, I think, and Shane, you were talking very acutely in your panel you were in earlier, about the need to, and the fact that you've got a really good story to tell to government, and some of it's deaf. I'm saying bits of it are deaf, but there are bits that are listening. I totally accept that. But the UK has 200 years of folly, which is a national reflex, which is to say, other people will feed us. And that's actually what you do. You bring food long distance and mean that Terry and his people don't have to grow it here. It's not quite like that, but it's sort of like that. Why? When we have a huge national experience of major shocks World War One, World War Two, which says don't do that. Why are we in a country where 54% of UK food is homegrown, when we've actually got a lot going for us? We've got climate coming our way as opposed to other, where you people bring food from areas which are already water depleted. And water is going to be the killer. We're finding climate change, think water. So we have actually a very big issue to resolve. And we've got a fragmented state. It's not actually in a good position. Doesn't mean to say we can't do anything. Doesn't mean to say, Shane and your people, you can't do good lobbying and be a good voice and get thoughts in there. But the big picture is not there. One of the reasons I accepted the invitation to come here, because I think you are critical to contribute to that big picture. The policy bits that are interesting are actually the Civil Contingencies Act 2004. Any of you read it? You should do. Civil Contingencies Act 2004, please read it. It isn't bedtime reading. Read it only when your brain is very, very closely engaged. But that set up things called resilience forums. Anyone heard of a resilience forum? No hands going up, not even Shane. He's weeping in his lack of knowledge here at the front row. There are 36 in Britain. Find out what your local resilience forum is. Wales, Terry, has just 2. England has 33. Scotland doesn't have any. Northern Ireland has a different structure. You need to find out, because this is class exercise. I'm a teacher here. Class exercise is find out who is the head of your local resilience forum. For nearly 20 years, these organizations have been the backbone of resilience, and you've never heard of them. Not good. Because if big shocks happen, it'll be them who are responsible for building up civil resilience. And let me just remind you of the National Risk Register talks about riots. And at what point does the public get restive? Okay? So, but we've got some thinking, some structures. The good news is last year the government, having given no money to resilience forums, they have no offices, no money, okay, but they are part of the state structure to deal with all civil contingencies. I mean, it's laughable. You can see why I'm an angry professor. It's a joke, actually, but a very serious joke and a sick joke. They've now got £22 million across the whole of the UK over 3 years. This is not a lot, but I hope. I had the pleasure once in my life to meet the man who started the Common Agricultural Policy. I said, what did you do? He said, I bought 5 filing cabinets. I said, great, you meant you had a budget. He said, exactly. At least now they're getting budgets. So now is a very good time, Shane, for your members to find out who your local resilience forums are. And even as we are here, answers to a questionnaire and an open letter I've written to all of them saying, what are you doing about food, are trickling in. And it shows no signs of talking to people like you. Let me just be very clear. So be diplomatic, but that's your class exercise. The good news is that there is a structure emerging. I'm trying to sell it to move on, and it's not moving on. What do I point at? Is it telling me to go away? No. There is. If you any of you read this report on the right, UK Government Resilience Forum, Shane, it's a good job you've got Shane here, isn't it? He's the only person nodding, for goodness sake. You need to read that. If you're talking about resilience, get knowing what it is you're supposed to be doing. And let me tell you, it's a very interesting document. I get really interested in this one because it has 3 principles. I haven't got enough time to say what the first 2 are. But the third is that the national resilience must be based upon a whole of society approach. The people, stupid, as President Clinton might have said. It's the people, stupid. In 1939, Britain had nearly 500 ships. Today, anyone know how many ships it's got to protect international logistics? No, don't exaggerate. You're a pessimist. 77. Okay? You can say they're big ships, but remember one of our aircraft carriers hasn't even got any airplanes. Did you know that? You did? Yeah, more of you knew that. That's good. But I think what we could do is basically improve, well, I've said this, I think, in one sentence. Let me say it's too top-down. The resilience framework is a very, very important document. Please read it, but it's too top-down. In the bottom right there is a map that will be no interest to you at all, but that's the map of food banks in Britain. There are more food banks than there are logistics companies in Britain. There's a complete distortion of what we want from our food system. There's much that we could be doing. I want to get to my 10th slide. Basically, I think we've got to get real. We're a declining power. We're interesting. We're only 67 million people to feed. We don't count very much. We actually haven't any room for the default position of assuming others will feed us, even with your brilliance. Secondly, I think we have got to change the supply system. I think in the next 50 years, a different angle on supply logistics is very likely to build up. Around the world, let me tell you, there are more people thinking we must build bioregionalism as resilience rather than long-distance resilience approach to logistics. But the critical intellectual thing is we've got to have what we call in my world a multi-criteria approach to resilience. It isn't just about physical shocks or energy. It's about environment, society, geopolitics, the economy, and also defense. My final point, if I can get the slide up, never put slides up because they don't work when you want them to. Oh, by the way, no, did you see I spent days, Shane, I spent days trying to get, I want to go back one, please, if someone's doing this. Yeah, okay, this. Do you like this? This is the Pacific. We've now just joined the Pacific Partnership, and here's the UK. The government is now advertising this is where Britain is. It's in the middle of the Pacific. If you haven't seen that sort of thinking, it tells you the gap really between reality and politics at the moment. Okay, without spelling them into too much detail, if anyone wants any details, they're in my actual written paper. I think we do need a food strategy. If you have time and read the government's national one, it's very weak. I think we have got to shorten or think about shortening, having long distance, but also build up more short chains where possible, regional cold chills. If you start talking to your local resilience forum, that's the sort of thing I think you should be pushing at them. I think that therefore means more devolved powers. Britain is still messing up its politics. It's too centralised on Westminster. We've got a bit of decentralisation, but it's very patchy. But all of you have got a resilience forum you should and could be working for. I think you are, Shane was quite right and is right, and you are right. You are a very important industry. Your voice of thinking about different options for the future, not that there is only one way, but think about options for the future. I think you will be really powerful in that. And that's what mostly the intelligence world, the defense world, and indeed the critical national infrastructure world is beginning to think we have to do. But we're locked into a century, at least a century of infrastructure investment. We're not going to do this change very quickly. But it's going to need very clear and very smart thinking. So in a sense, what I'm saying, and I hope Shane doesn't sack me completely for this, he asked me to think about the sort of the big global picture. I've been thinking about it through the prism of Britain. Here we are, a declining power. We're the 6th richest economy on the planet now. But we've still got a lot of money, a lot of skills, and a lot of capability to do a better job than we're doing at the moment. Thanks very much.